BSides DC 2017 videos are brought to you by Threat Quotient, introducing the industry's first threat intelligence platform designed to enable threat operations and management, and Data Tribe, a new kind of startup studio co-building the next generation of commercial cybersecurity, analytics, and big data product companies.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Claire Tills, and you're hopefully here for the Advanced Soft Skills Using Efficacy to Get Shit Done talk. That is what you will be learning about today. Anybody not here? Stay. It'll be fun. So, to start us off, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm giving this talk. So, I am actually a communication researcher. My background isn't in information security. I know just enough about technology to be dangerous. And so I'm trying to balance that with my expertise in communication. I recently received my master's from the University of Maryland with a focus on crisis communication and PR. Over the summer, after I graduated, I started writing a blog and continued doing some speaking engagements on this subject, really applying theories and perspectives from communication and crisis communication specifically to issues in information security. Part of that was this April, I was at BSides Rochester, great event if you can get up there, and they had lightning talks. These were quick 5-minute talks where people would stand up and say something that they were working on or thoughts that they were having. And there were actually 2 lightning talks that kind of inspired this. And one of them was this really excited, energetic young man talking about how information security needs to do more to get recommendations across. They need to find out how to get the knowledge that they have to the people who need it in an effective way. And I thought, wait, I can help with that. And so I actually went up after him and I gave my quick lightning talk, and there were a couple of really interesting questions. People seemed to want to hear more, and that young man's kind of thoughts also reminded me of a lot of complaints that I heard from my friends in InfoSec of no one listens to us, or no one takes our recommendations. And so I decided to make this talk. I've got a blog about it as well, because efficacy is a tool from communication that I think can be really useful in the InfoSec space to people who have all different roles. It's all about getting people to take the recommendations that you give and actually run with them. And so another thing that I want to do is help move information security conversations away from crisis communication. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a couple up here. The main thing is that if you're only talking about information security when a crisis is going on, you're building a lot of negative associations. People don't feel good when they talk about information security because they're only talking about it when something is going wrong. You're not building positive associations with the general public, with the people in an organization, with anyone at all, really. They feel bad. It's like talking about illness or death. We don't feel good when we talk about it, so we don't talk about it, so we don't do anything about it. Another reason that crisis communication isn't the only way we should be talking about information security is that it creates silos. And so if you're in an organization, the PR, communication, marketing, sales, the people doing communication, the normal communication is completely cut off from the security operations. So the only time they ever have to know anything about security is when things are going wrong and they have to learn on the fly. Usually they don't, and communication goes badly. Think of a case, and it's usually the communication team not knowing anything about information security that screws it up. So siloing, bad. If you have stronger, ongoing conversations between security and communication, your crisis communication is going to be better. Everything's going to be better. Let's all just be friends, right? So the final reason that crisis communication is insufficient is that what if the bad things never happen? A lot of the people that I kind of talk to and work with in this space are really tired of fear being the main motivating factor for doing something about cybersecurity. So we scare people to get them to change. But what if the bad thing we're saying is going to happen hasn't? So we see all these companies go through these major breaches, but most of them don't go out of business. Most of them are still operating today. Most of them still have customers. And when you're talking about individual consumers and end users, yeah, pretty much everyone in the United States social security number is out there, but what does that actually mean to them? None of them probably, no one on sort of the general public probably knows anyone who has had major negative repercussions for having their social security number and PII lost. That means that they can create distance. They're saying, okay, well, you're telling me to be afraid, but I don't know anyone who's experienced a negative outcome from this, so it's not going to impact me. So I want to move us to a more positive side of the conversation. Tell people how they can gain from being more secure, rather than scare them about what they might lose from being not secure. Gain versus potential loss that potentially will never happen. So why should you care? Who here has had an I told you so moment at work where you told someone to do something and they said, we don't have the money for it, or that's not a priority, and then you got to say, I told you so later? Raise of hands, who has done that? And keep your hands up if that felt good. If you felt really happy. That's more of a personality test. But, you know, you guys have a lot of recommendations. You have the knowledge about what behavior needs to change, and I'm hoping to give you guys the tools to actually achieve it. So you don't have to say, I told you so, because your company is experiencing a breach and is responding really poorly. So why advanced soft skills? Soft skills are really popular in InfoSec right now. We see a lot of roundups of these are the soft skills you need to succeed. There are conversations about humanizing InfoSec. All of them are really popular. One of the #1 items you see on a list of soft skills for InfoSec is empathy. I like the idea of empathy. It's putting yourself in other people's shoes. The term I like that I found in the dictionary is imaginative projection, which is just a fancy way of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. But you're trying to understand the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another person without direct input from them. And so efficacy, using that, requires direct application of empathy. You have to really think about your audience's perspectives and experiences and feelings and fears in order to use efficacy. So you have to use some soft skills, so we're taking it another level beyond just be empathetic to use empathy. And then also, you have to be a little more than personable sometimes. You have to, you know, really sit down and think about how the other person feels and try and connect with them. And that can be a little more of a struggle, and it's not as crucial as the empathy. And empathy, I think, can be a little easier. So I like answering questions and knowing why people do things. So if you think of it as a problem to solve rather than an interpersonal skill, that might make it a little easier if you struggle on the interpersonal things a little bit. If you don't connect with people as well, think of these questions as problems to be solved, and then use research, use whatever tools at your disposal to solve them. So you're solving the person rather than connecting with them. Those are kind of two options that hopefully will address most of you. All right, so efficacy. Anyone familiar with the term or concept? Couple shy hands. All right, so Merriam-Webster defines it as the power or ability to produce an effect or effectiveness, which isn't a great definition. It's like 2 steps away from using the actual term in the definition, but it gets the point across. Efficacy is the ability to produce some desired effect. And the way we're talking about it today, the desired effect is behavior change. So that's what we're working with today. I want to trace the history because that definition wasn't fantastic. So we're going to look at a couple of different disciplines that have used efficacy and talk about how it's kind of gotten to me, talking to you about using efficacy for InfoSec. So the first use that I was able to find is as a medical or pharmacological term. I don't know why I made myself say that, but I did, and I didn't stumble. So medical, pharmacological, capacity for beneficial change. And this is where scientific researchers, doctors, those sorts of folks are talking about the therapeutic effect of a drug, device, or procedure. I was loosely familiar with this application of the word. It's just, does treatment A solve problem X? Efficacy. There are rates of efficacy, it's lots of statistics. Are there any sort of more technical uses of InfoSec? Is anything in technology treated with, it has an efficacy of 20% with this problem? Anybody seen it in that use before? Some grumbles? Maybe, maybe not. Well, this is sort of where it started. And then the concept kind of traveled across campus is how I think of it, because on most academic campuses, the sciences are way over here and the humanities are way over here, complete opposite sides, don't talk to each other, don't even look at each other. But eventually, the idea of efficacy traveled from those more scientific and medical departments to the humanities side with health communication, which makes sense. You've got the people who are using efficacy to discuss medical treatments, and then you've got people in health communication who are trying to then talk to the general public about how to improve health, all of those things. So health communication and schools of public health kind of brought it over. So what are some issues you think health communication has used efficacy for? So anytime you're talking about a public health campaign, so get your flu shots, stop smoking, use condoms, get tested, those are all health campaigns. So health communication, those are the people who design campaigns around health. So I listed a couple. Any other ideas for what health communication uses efficacy to do? Wait, bye.
Changing behaviors.
Changing behaviors, yes, exactly. Trying to change any health-related behavior. Culture change, that's a big one too. So we've got some cultural changes that relate to health that, we try and change over time. One that I recently saw was actually apparently eating canned seafood, so like tuna isn't as bad when you're pregnant. So the CDC recently released a campaign saying you don't have to worry as much about mercury. We need you to get the omega-3s and the beneficial things from seafood. So, anything having to do with cultural or behavioral change. One example that you guys may or may not recognize that I really like, does anyone remember these ads with this doctor guy? It was about pre-diabetes. All right, I don't remember where it ran, but it stuck in my brain for some reason when I was doing this. And so this commercial is about figuring out if you have pre-diabetes and trying to push you to go talk to your doctor about it. And so the commercial is all about reducing the barrier to the behavior. So trying to figure out if you have pre-diabetes sounds like the job of a doctor. It sounds like something that the general person sitting on their couch watching television isn't capable of doing. And so they took it to a very simplistic level. They made sure that people felt capable of doing the behavior. So in this commercial, what the guy does is he gives you a list of questions. And if you answer yes to the questions, he tells you, hold up X number of fingers. So anyone in your family have diabetes, you hold up a finger. There's a chart with different body types. It's got numbers underneath. So if you have a particular body type, you then add 2 fingers. And at the end of the commercial, it says, okay, if you have more than 5 fingers up, you need to talk to your doctor. Here's a link to go find more resources to help you with that conversation. So the advertisement is all about reducing fear and reducing barriers so that whatever the commercial is asking you to do is easy and then gives you more information on how to then act on the knowledge you gain. So I really like this example. I've got a copy of the video in my slides later, but it's a good thing to watch if you just type in pre-diabetes checklist, you can find it. It's a good example of using efficacy for a mass communication campaign. So the question with health communication is, how do doctors and public health organizations convince people to do healthy things? So health is a major area for behavior change, as I mentioned, and therefore it's a big area for advocacy research. When it comes to health, even if we know the right thing, we don't really often do it. So out of the audience, raise of hands, who here doesn't do things that they should? All right, who does things that they shouldn't do? Yeah. And if you're particularly brave, I would like to hear why. So somebody, it's fun. What other reasons?
It's good.
It's hard to do the right thing, way in the back.
Forget.
You forget. So some people smoke, some people drink, eat junk food. In this audience, I guarantee this is one, don't sleep enough. And we all have justifications for not doing the things we should do or doing the things we shouldn't. We all have these internal justifications. We know that we shouldn't be doing it or we should be sleeping more, but we don't because it's fun or it's really hard. And so efficacy is about taking down those justifications. That's what it's really about, is finding out what your audience's justification for their current behavior is and dismantling it, or making it seem too costly, or making the advised behavior seem really easy. Whatever you're doing, you've got to find out that justification and then take it apart. So, one thing that I wanted to add actually before this is one last discipline, emergency preparedness. And this is where I kind of see the overlap with information security, because emergency preparedness communication is all about getting your audience, whoever they are, to take actions that will reduce the damage of an eventual crisis. You're not necessarily trying to get them to avoid a crisis altogether. That's the holy grail. That's what you would love to do. But in reality, what you're trying to do is get them to mitigate whatever damage comes about because of a crisis that is going to happen. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up. It also frequently overlaps with health communication. If there's an epidemic, emergency preparedness comes in. CDC does a lot of emergency communication. And so now I want to talk about the principles of use. I'm no longer going to really parse disciplines anymore. I'm going to be bringing stuff in from emergency, from health communication, public relations, all different ingredients in the soup. And so we're going to talk about different types of efficacy and how to actually use them. So research has found, discovered, arbitrarily created, however you want to call it, many types of efficacy. There are maybe an infinite number. I'm going to focus on two very specific ones because they're the ones you see that are most common in research and are also the easiest to understand. So the first one is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the perception that you can do the recommended behavior. So whatever behavior you want your audience to do, self-efficacy is their internal belief that they can actually do the thing. So if it's about diet and exercise, the self-efficacy aspect would be, well, I've got bad knees, I can't run. That's low self-efficacy. So the first one is the internal belief of whether or not you can perform the recommended action. The next one is response efficacy. That is the perception that whatever action is being recommended will actually solve the problem. Do you believe changing your diet and exercise will make you healthier? Do you believe that whatever pill they're recommending or whatever shot they're recommending, do you think the flu shot will protect you from the flu? That's response efficacy. So these are the two key components. Can I do the thing? Will the thing solve my problem? Those are the two that we're talking about. Before you can really manipulate these, though, you have to know a decent amount about your audience. You need to know whether or not they perceive that there's a problem. So do they know that whatever issue impacts them? Do they know that they are at risk for prediabetes? Do they know that they're living an unsecure life? So what is the problem and finding out if it actually applies to them. The second and most sort of important one is constraint recognition. These are those justifications we talked about. Why aren't they doing the thing that they should? And there are a lot of really common constraints that you'll see in every issue. I'm too busy with work. I don't have enough money. I don't have X resource. All of these are really common. So out of problem recognition or constraint recognition, which do you think is the biggest issue for InfoSec? issues. Which one do you think is going to cause you the most trouble? Constraint? Everybody kind of agree that it's constraint?
Problem.
A couple people. Yeah, both of these for sure are not great. But it really does depend on the issue in your audience, which is which. But constraint recognition is the one that stands out to me, just because you can have this laundry list of constraints, this laundry list of justifications and excuses. So as soon as you get them to accept that one of those constraints isn't there, well, they've got another one in their back pocket that they can throw out. It's like, okay, well, I made sure that this works for your budget, and they're like, okay, well, now we don't have the staffing. And it becomes this sort of card trick of running down their list of constraints. So you need to know, do they recognize that there is a problem, and do they perceive that there are too many constraints to fix it? So I want to touch on this a little bit because I did mention the word manipulate, and it can be a bit of a dirty word. I know in public relations and communications in general, we really try to stay away from the words persuade, manipulate, influence, because we're very sensitive about being looped in with propaganda, but that's what we're doing here. We are influencing people, we are persuading people, we're manipulating them a little bit. Hopefully it's for their betterment. It's to make them more secure, it's to protect them. I can trust you guys not to use these powers for evil, right? Maybe not the audience to ask that question, but the idea is we're manipulating certain aspects of their perception. And most of that is because people's risk perception sucks. So we're trying to give them a more accurate idea of reality, and that requires a little bit of manipulation. So I just wanted to address that. All right, so now that we know about their problem recognition and their constraint recognition, we have done our research, we maybe have talked to our audience. So if it's an internal audience, if it's your executives, you can talk to them directly and ask, what are your constraints? Why won't you do these things I'm telling you to do? You might, however, not have direct access to your audience, or your audience might lie to you when you ask those questions. So do some research, do some imaginative projection, think of what their constraints are. Think of why they aren't doing the thing, and that's point A. You know where they are now. What you then need to figure out is where they need to be to act. What is the minimum threshold for action with whatever behavior you're recommending? That ideally would come from empirical research, but we don't have time for that right now. So you're going to have to, again, do some guesswork. Figure out, okay, how far do I have to move the needle to get them to do something? And then you're moving them from where they are to where they need to be, hopefully to get some action. And so what we're going to do now is go into a little more detail on that process. Sorry. All right, so first off, you've got self-efficacy. It may be as simple as telling them they can do the thing. It might be as simple as just straight out telling them, this is something that you can accomplish. However, if their problem recognition is low, they might not realize that the problem is there. So I see problem recognition coming in two different forms. Either they don't see that it is a problem, or they don't see that it's their problem. And I think for certain executives and end users in particular, that second one is more important. They are passing the buck. We see that especially when it gets to the level of crisis, people pushing it off, saying, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my job, pushing that problem down the chain. So what you might be doing is a little more aggressive. You might have to say, you have to do this. This is your problem, you own this problem. Don't be that aggressive, but maybe be a little more aggressive. So what you're trying to figure out is, why don't they perceive the problem as theirs? That one's a little easier, because probably they will tell you it's either they don't know, oh, I didn't know that was a problem, or it's, oh, well, so-and-so in such and such is dealing with that. And then you just come back and say, no, this is yours. You own this now. It's a puppy. You have to take care of it. I'm going to watch you. So self-efficacy is really closely tied with problem recognition. They have to recognize there's a problem before they start to think about whether or not they can solve it. It is rarely as simple as just saying, you can do the thing. But hopefully you run into a couple of issues like that. Remember, at this point, you already know a lot about your audience. You know where they are in terms of problem recognition and constraint recognition. So now you have to remove your perceived constraints. And that really depends on your audience and what kind of constraints they're perceiving. So the focus with both problem recognition and, to a certain extent, constraint recognition has been fear. And I think what we can really do is move this in a more positive direction. Rather than trying to scare people about what will happen if they aren't more secure, try and think of positive feelings that will come from being more secure. So maybe you have a competitor or you have a company that you go up to and you say, okay, well, your competitor, who's basically exactly the same as you, experienced this, so you're definitely going to experience this issue. Most likely, your organization is going to say, no, that won't happen to us. We're special. And that's really common. That's why risk perception is so bad. Even if your identical twin experiences something, there are internal mechanisms in our brain that will make us say, I'm special, I'm different. That's not going to happen to me. So fear can be a bit of a crapshoot. But if you move in a more positive direction, and for the example that I gave, say, okay, well, here's how you get a leg up on your competitors. Here's how you look better than everyone else. This could be a selling point. Make it a more positive conversation and make them feel good while you're talking about security. That's going to open up the conversation more and make them more receptive to whatever you're saying, instead of saying, if you don't do this, bad things will happen. You're like, okay, but if I don't think about it, I don't have to think about the bad things, and then the bad things will never happen, right? That's how this works. So more positive framing, I think, is a really important key for this that is missing, and I think can be pulled in fairly easily, hopefully. All right, so you are trying to remove whatever constraints they perceived, and I put up a list of the most common ones that kind of arc across all different issues. You're going to run into individual ones for all of your audiences and problems. The first one that I think is biggest, especially for security, is that this is really unfamiliar territory. People aren't talking about security on a regular basis. It's not something that they run into in their day-to-day lives. So it is scary and they want to put it away. So if there are ways you can make that unfamiliar behavior more familiar, that will hopefully remove those constraints. One constraint is commonly, I've never done this before, or that's not how we do things. And so if you can tie whatever you want them to do to something they're already doing, that's a really useful way to kind of overcome that common barrier. So anecdotes are really useful here. You've got to be very specific with your anecdotes. You don't want to just slapshod them everywhere, but if you've got a specific anecdote of, doing this particular behavior is like getting your oil changed every 3 months or getting your annual checkups. That's language that they're going to understand, and it'll remind them this is something you don't do one and done. It is routine maintenance. So tying things to something that they already do. You guys have the experience, so you're going to come up with much better anecdotes than I will, but think of it in that term of you guys live in this space all the time. They are probably hearing about it for the first time, and it's scary. So tying it to something that they've heard about before will reduce some of those barriers. Trust. Why are you recommending this specific thing? Why this one thing? Why are you telling me to do this now? All of those questions. And so the solution I see to this trust is actually showing your work. Walk them through your reasoning. Tell them why in the simplest language you can, because like I said, it might be brand new, but show your work. They made you do it in high school and elementary school for a reason. We need to know how you got to this answer. And when you're doing that with your audience in persuasion, it allows them to see if they agree with your reasoning. And they can question it, and you can have that open conversation. So if you're telling them why you've made this decision, it'll make them feel a little more empowered, and again, remove that constraint of not trusting your recommendation. Finally, money. This one, I don't have a solution for. If I did, I would be on an island somewhere. So money is the biggest constraint. And the one solution that I've seen to this is you can't afford to have a breach. and that's sort of become the narrative of the money that it takes to recover from a breach or some sort of major incident is way more than the money you would spend to prevent it. I have no idea if that's true because, like I said, I only know enough about technology to be dangerous. So you guys will have to kind of work in your own individual cases to break down the money argument. But, you know, it can be tied into other things. It can be tied into trusting the organization. One of my friends recently tweeted at our university, "You don't pay me enough to use mandatory two-factor authentication." And part of me was like, yes! And the other part was like, no! But it was very true of if your end users are the ones you're trying to persuade and there's a bad corporate culture, they're going to resist anything you try to do because of a cultural thing. They might say it's because of money, but really it's because they don't like the company. So some of these might get tangled up, but that's something to keep in mind. I just really liked that tweet because as a grad student, you really get that of like, you want me to do another thing with this salary? But anyway, that's a total different story. All right, so then you have to prove that whatever you're recommending is the best action. And this is one, again, that I think InfoSec struggles with a little bit, just as kind of an outsider and more of the consumer. There are so many recommendations about what the best action to do is to be secure. Do I need a long password? Should I pull them from the dictionary? Can I not use dictionary words? Do I have to have symbols? Do I need this? Do I need that? And that's just passwords. That doesn't get into anything complicated. So trying to convince them that this is the best action and why, I think is something that the whole community can work on a little bit more, but you're going to have your own individual cases, so it might be easier. And the way you can do this is statistical evidence, if you've got it. If the vendor has, you know, this particular tool prevented this particular problem 20% of the time, whatever. Statistics can be persuasive. So use those if you've got them. Anecdotes, like I said, if you are consulting and another client deployed that technology and it worked for them, use that. But the last one is also showing that you have very specific knowledge of your audience's situation. So that can build rapport, it can build trust, it shows that you know what you're doing, and it'll hopefully break down those, you don't know my life, you don't know my choices, pushbacks you get. If you can tell them, this is your system and here's how this will improve it, that can kind of break down this barrier of why is this the best action. It's like, okay, well, I know everything about your system and I picked this. So trust me. Showing personal knowledge of their situation, I think, is a really good way to get over this that can kind of skirt around some of the other issues. All right, I did that already. All right, so we don't have time for that. So I did want to touch on a couple of specific things with InfoSec that I see as a problem. The first is before an incident, making the risks real. We talked about problem recognition is an issue. People don't realize there is a problem, and that is mostly about public awareness, communicating the risks with whoever's in charge in a way that they'll understand. There's a lot out there on risk perception. I encourage you to look it up if you can. But making the risks real is something that InfoSec has struggled with. It's been in the dark for so long that the instinct is to go big. When you've been kind of pushed off in a corner as, well, those are the tech guys, we don't understand them and they're kind of scary, so we'll put them over here. And then when you have to say something, you have to shout it. It has to be big and loud and on fire. You've gotten so used to that now that people are paying attention, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're here and I need you here. So maybe stepping back from those big fear appeals might get you a little more traction because we're developing this perception of Chicken Little, of you said all these horrible things would happen and then nothing did. So again, more positive conversations of here's good things that will happen if you take this behavior. Next, like I said, is linking security behaviors to things that they already do. And also avoiding unfamiliar language is really important. When I was in college, my brother, he works IT for an IT firm, so like inception levels of IT. And so he became our family's IT support, and he would walk me through problems on the phone. I'm like, okay, well, take me back 3 steps and then define what this word is, because you're 10 minutes ahead of me, and I don't know what the first word you said was. So think about the words that your audience isn't gonna know. Don't use them, or if you have to use them, define them in advance. And I know this is a lot of work on your part, so if you want to talk one-on-one on how to make this less work for you, I am available, because like a lot of this is falling on your shoulders, and I understand that's not fair, but it's going to be a bigger conversation to get other people proactively reaching out to you guys for help. And then overcoming fatalism. This is one that we're seeing more and more recently, particularly with consumers I mean, my PII is gone. It's gone like 8 times. Who cares? I can't do anything. You keep telling me that I'm going to be breached no matter what I do, so why am I going to spend the money to do anything? So overcoming that fatalism, I think, can come from those more proactive, positive framings of, okay, so you can't avoid the crisis, but you can sell it to your consumers, you can, tout it as part of your reputation that you did this thing, or you can get a leg up on your competitors, taking it in a more positive way, because they're like, I mean, I'm screwed anyway, like, I don't know what to do. So overcoming that fatalism. And then, I know I mentioned crisis communication isn't the ideal place to do this, but it's gonna happen. So you wanna know a little bit about how to use this in a crisis. So during an incident, you're really trying to highlight protective powers. You're really trying to say, this thing that I'm telling you to do will mitigate the damage. You're focusing on mitigating damage at this point, not preventing risk, because the risk has already happened. Using, again, statistics and anecdotes to prove the response efficacy, so showing them how things will be better if they do the thing, showing that that response will actually work. And then small digestible actions. When things are going poorly, you really have to break it down into tiny little steps, because their brains are already moving at 1,000 miles a minute. They've got 18 different people that they need to be talking to all at once. So the smallest step can be very important. And then finally, throughout all of this, is embracing uncertainty. As far as I know, there is no silver bullet for information security. There's no one solution that's going to fix all of your problems. So you're going to have to incorporate some of like, this is probably going to work for you, and then be prepared for when it doesn't. And being honest with them. A lot of times you want to go in and say, this is definitely going to work, this is going to fix all of your problems. That can get some pushback, because people know that that's not reality. So embracing uncertainty and showing people that, to the best of my knowledge, this will work. However, things go awry, will actually build trust. We trust people when they admit their faults. So if you go into a company or an audience or whoever you're talking to and admit that not everything is going to be perfect, they'll trust what you say down the line more than if you came in and said, I'm perfect, this is perfect, we're going to be perfect, let's go. People are a little sketchy with that. Okay, so we're going to skip this and go straight to, this is my overview, and now I'm going to take the last 5 or so minutes for questions, if you have any, up in the front. Pride.
How do you overcome, basically, you can tell them, here's everything that we know, but they want to be the smartest person in the room. They don't want, it's not your job to tell them about their code. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, so that's definitely a constraint or a barrier. So he was asking about pride. When you go into someone and they want to be the smartest person, and that's a really difficult one, and that actually, my recommendation might be, if you've got a comms person that you know or works in your company, try and talk to them and see if they can help you with your presentation. Because we spend a lot of time in public relations trying to figure out how to prove the return on investment for an intangible thing. And that's something InfoSec struggles with as well. But we also have to deal with a lot of executives saying, I can communicate. Like, I've got this, go away.
Developers.
Yeah, and so they, yeah, well, what I'm talking about is the communication and interpersonal skills, they might be able to help you if you go to them and say, all right, I've got this guy, Joe, whoever, and they're like, oh, I know Joe, let me work with you. So they might have those interpersonal skills, but a lot of it is also trying to kind of get them to come up with the idea and come to you, because that's a very personal thing, and you're never going to convince everyone. So it does come down to, is there someone else I can talk to? And that might not be the case.
And now you're back to pride, because now they've tried.
Yeah, pride is probably the hardest one to overcome, so thank you for that. But it is something where it is very personal, so if you can find something to connect you and something that can make them feel even more prideful, so if you can find a way to frame your recommendation in a way that will give them more pride, that's probably the best way. All right, yeah.
What about intellectual curiosity inside of me? Instead of wanting something and not wanting to have this, so then actually wanting to know how something happens.
So are you asking how do we get them to be more intellectually curious? That's a tough one because, again, it is a very personal thing, but it can be put in terms of empowerment. So if you put it in terms of, well, I can tell you how to do this, but if I show you how to do it, you can then show your friends, or you can protect yourself when I'm not around. So putting it in terms of empowerment, making them feel safer on an ongoing matter, making them feel smarter, more prideful, all of those things I think is a good way to kind of encourage that intellectual curiosity of saying, okay, well, I'm going to teach you, and then you go teach your friends and show them how smart you are. Those sort of personal quirks that everybody has. Anything else?
To that dude's question, you get them to think that it was their idea.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can get someone to think it's their own idea, you are golden. So it does really come down to, okay, how do I hack his brain to make him think he came up with this idea first? All right, anything else? Yep.
Are there any situations in which fear would need to be the motivator in changing their actions?
It really depends. We see fear used fairly commonly with public health campaigns. So actually, it wasn't the blog I wrote about this, but I wrote a blog about fear appeals. And so seatbelt advertisements, major use of fear appeals. Drunk driving, huge. FEMA will use it as well with their Get a Kit, Make a Plan, Be Prepared campaigns. They'll show a house completely in shambles and say, now's not the time to have a plan. I don't know any specific cases for InfoSec, but they might exist. But usually there is 100% chance that catastrophic damage will happen. That's when fear might happen. Y2K. Fear. All right, anything else? I don't see any hands. If you have a hand up, wave a little bit more vigorously. All right, cool. So thank you guys so much for your time. I'm going to be around all weekend. I'm on Twitter. I have a blog. I have business cards. I love talking about this. So thank you guys so much for your attention.